Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, as I've supported men in their love and work lives for 15 years now, many men have asked me for the right words to say to be more attractive, desirable, and more of a leader. And I've found it's not so simple as giving scripts or lines. Because at the root of a connected and affectionate relationship and being more effective and inspiring at work is your ability to influence others. But most often, influence is not gained or lost with words. It's from what I call the invisible factors. So I created a quick guide for you called 3 Ways Men Lose Influence at Work and with Women, so you can understand how these invisible factors work and what has women and colleagues both more inspired to say yes. I think you're also going to be surprised to find out the moment when your influence actually begins. So grab the guide for free at ShaynaJamesCoaching.com/3ways. That's ShaynaJamesCoaching.com/3 and the word ways, WAYS. Or you can text ALIVE to 44144. That's the word ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144. I hope you enjoy the guide and this episode. Hello and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I'm your host, Shayna James, and I'm here with Alyssa Marine. Welcome, Alyssa.
Thanks, Shayna.
We are doing a part 2, Simple Experiments for Better Sex, because at the end of the last episode, I always have this sense that, we're just diving in and there's so much more to cover. But for this one especially, I had the sense like, okay, we gave men, 1 or 2 experiments and there was so much more. So let's start today's episode with talking about a couple of the challenges that you've seen men specifically face. I know some of the common ones are erectile dysfunction and premature ejaculation. And I've also worked with many men. I don't do the same work that you do, but as we talk about relationships in their sex lives, I often come across men who I would describe as the nice guys or the good guys or the givers and the pleasers, right? And eventually at some point that breaks down and they're not really enjoying themselves and they're not feeling like they're having a pleasurable sex life, even though on paper it looks really good. So yeah, what do you have to say about any of those? You can choose where to dive in to start.
Just that. There's ways that these things feel so interrelated.
Yeah.
For some men, not for all men, right? Like, I think what I want to start by saying is that it's not simple. It's not, we're talking about simple experiments for better sex. So there's ways to work with all of this and to work with sexual challenges, whatever they are. I stay away from the word dysfunction because
I like that.
Usually there's not an actual dysfunction going on. It's a highly intelligent response of your body, or just
I've totally found that over the years, especially with erectile challenges, where a lot of men, as they're getting older, seem to need more emotional connection, to slow down, to actually feel intimate with a person, and that can often be surprising for them. And as I've worked with men, I'm like, we've slowed down enough that we've started to listen, and they've listened to their bodies, and it's been a little bit weird for them at first to be like, okay, I'm talking to my body, but they're always something comes out that is new knowledge and new information and a new way that they that they've changed as they've gotten older.
Totally. Yeah, there's that side of things. And it's also, I find all of these challenges are actually fairly common across the age spectrum.
Awesome.
Young men, middle-aged men, older men. It's not like premature ejaculation we tend to think of as something that young men experience, but it's not. It's something that most men will experience at some point in their lives, but through their lifetime.
That's a great point too, right? That men can go in and out of these experiences. And I would imagine that as a man faces one of these challenges, it can seem like, oh no, this is going to be forever.
Totally. And that's part of the challenge of working with it. So I was saying before that there's simple ways to work with all of this stuff, but that the reasons why it's happening is very complex and very individualized to each person. Yeah. So it's about, I like to say it comes down to your relationship to yourself, to your body, to sexuality in general, and to your partner. And there can be things showing up in one of those areas or in all of them. Usually it's a combination that is impacting what's happening for you.
Yes, that makes so much sense.
So working with it usually requires that you dig into all of those different areas, and then also just learn some really practical information about your body and about the human sexual response. And the nervous system that can help ground you in understanding that the way that your body is responding is actually appropriate, even though it's not what you want to be happening.
Interesting.
The response is understandable. Like it's not a surprise.
About that, like the appropriateness, even if
let's talk about erectile dysfunction or erectile challenges. Again, I don't like to use the word dysfunction, but it's hard people know what I'm talking about when I say it.
Right.
So oftentimes it's a nervous system response that's happening as a result of anxiety. So when you're feeling nervous or anxious, which holy shit, sex is like, especially for men, there's so much pressure on performing in a really particular, specific way. I feel like for women, and maybe this might not be true in your experience, but it's true in mine, the doors have been sort of flung wide open for women. We can have so many different responses and experiences when it comes to sex, and it's all being increasingly normalized and made okay, and we can get help and support in so many different places. And men still have to fit in this really narrow box of get hard, stay hard. And now there's the added layers of like, fuck her open to God and do all of those things. So it's fucking loaded.
Yeah.
Right. And men are simultaneously, especially men that are doing work and starting to come into more awareness of themselves and of their partners and of emotions and, all of that, they're increasingly sensitive, which is a beautiful thing, just in general. Like they're more sensitive to what's happening in a room. They can't just override their experience anymore. Yeah. And so all of that sets up the situation where there's tons of pressure. Your, default ways, maybe historically, of overriding that pressure and just like getting yourself going are no longer available. And so your body is in essentially a fight or flight response, which when that's happening, when you're in your sympathetic nervous system in a fight or flight response, blood is flowing away from your genitals to prepare you to fight or to run away.
Right.
And so it's literally impossible to get an erection because the blood is actively flowing away from your genitals. And so understanding that sort of a thing and that can happen with a single thought. It doesn't take much. It doesn't take much. You can have one thought that's basically just, and then it's
interesting too. Like I would say it happens for women too, but our physicality is so much different that we can, it's not as visible, right? It's hidden.
Totally. We can have sex without being aroused. We can have intercourse without being aroused. Yeah. So it's really tricky. And so the great thing about all of this is that there's ways you can work with your nervous system to get yourself grounded and downregulated so that blood will flow to your genitals and you can actually get an erection.
Ooh, okay. Let's talk about that. Grounded, and you said downregulated?
Downregulated, yeah. So, so there's, I don't want to go into, I'm not going to go into all of the information about the nervous system around this because you don't have to know it to be able to do it. But there's a lot to know about the nervous system and the human sexual response that I find fascinating, but it's sort of nerdy. So downregulation, is pretty simple, but it can be tricky to get to. But the easiest way to get to it is to do a few breaths where you're just focusing on the out breath and following it out of your body. So it can be that simple to start to downregulate your nervous system. Upregulation in a fight or flight response is accompanied by like higher heart rates, faster breathing, all of those sorts of things. And so you'll know you're starting to come into downregulation when your breathing slows, your heart rate slows, and you can actually, feel the chair beneath you or the bed beneath you, whatever it is, the ground beneath you, and come back into your body. And it takes time,
Yeah. And I'm just, as you're talking about this, I'm imagining the potential. I think this is what I work with men on a lot, of doing this with your partner, right? That it doesn't have to be this secretive thing where suddenly you're like, oh, I'm going to do this thing. I don't want my partner to know. I'm going to have to be alone in this because it's embarrassing, right? There's a way that you can make all of these things really intimate and even more connected. And that, if you do have a partner who's a woman, I think often we can end up feeling safer that we can slow things down or ask for something to stop if we need it, or, so I just want to put a plug in for not doing it alone or trying to hide it, but actually doing it with your partner.
Totally. And it's going to help. It's probably going to bring her into a more satisfying sexual experience also, because downregulating her system is going to make more arousal possible for her, because women have as much erectile tissue as men. It's just internal, not obvious and external the way that a cock is. And so
how does downregulating create more arousal for her?
It just allows the blood to actually flow toward her genitals as well.
Got it.
So it's helpful for everyone. I mean, even just starting there, this can be, it can be really vulnerable to introduce this sort of a new thing to a partner, but just sitting together and setting a timer, even if you just do 2 minutes where you're in your own space, you're not touching each other. You could do it with some eye gazing if that's your jam, or just with yourself where you're for 2 minutes following the out breath, bringing the breath into your low belly, and really slowing everything down to set the stage for downregulation to be happening, which can then allow arousal to actually happen.
Yeah. And when you help couples or, even singles who have a partner who's not there, are there ways that you have them, either ask to create a game or an experiment, or like, how do you help them bridge the gap between where they are and their partner is and, make that happen?
I love to set up experiments and send people home with really clear experiment. You could call them games, experiments. I don't know what the difference is between them, because they feel sort of similar to me. Yeah. Some things are obviously games, but just to practice and play with these things. So, and it requires that both partners be on board. So if doing it by yourself, obviously you just have to be on board, and there's a ton that you can practice on your own. And usually when I'm working with someone, even with couples together, they have homework to do that is individual homework, usually something in the realm of self-pleasure, and then something together. And to stick with the ED conversation, one practice to be doing with it, and we might have spoken about this last time a little bit, so if I'm repeating myself, then it must be really important.
Yes, I was going to say, then it must be really important.
Is to self-pleasure. This is great for both men and women, but to self-pleasure, I know I talked about this, taking the goal out entirely, where the goal is not to get to an orgasm, not even to get an erection, but just to find and follow what feels good in your body.
Yep.
But to actually be touching your cock without any sort of an erection, and actually backing off if you get one.
Interesting.
where then you just start to build more of a relationship with your soft cock rather than just only relating with your cock when it's hard or when you're trying to get it there.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And so that can be just it's almost like a, what is it called when you, reverse psychology? It's a little bit of that, not really. It's more just starting to give your body and your nervous system the space to trust that you are going to relate with it on its terms rather than trying to force it into a particular way of being.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about how, God, there's so many thoughts went through my mind. It's all jumbled, but one of them is thinking about in my relationships with men or my sex life with men, how hot it can be simply to look into each other's eyes or to just breathe together, right? Or to explore what it's like in the last episode, you gave some ways to touch each other. So in a way, our genitals are kind of bonus, but in our culture, that's where we start, So,
yeah, this is great. You wanted to talk about the erotic map.
Yeah.
And this leads into it so beautifully. So we've taken my understanding of the word erotic is probably different than most of you listening to this. And it comes from, I'm just going to do like a super brief Greek mythology thing, which is that way back, like 400 AD or BC, I can't remember what the specific dates are, but the god Eros, so Eros becomes Cupid, and Cupid is this like bumbling baby who shoots people and makes them fall in love and act like idiots, right? Yep. So that's Cupid. Eros is the Greek version of Cupid, and way back, Eros was one of the first gods, and he wasn't gendered at this point, and he's easier to use, but it was him and I think Chaos mated together to birth humans into existence. And so Eros is this huge fucking energy, right? It's this like massive thing that brings all of existence into form. And we have collapsed it all down into what we do with our genitals and into really intercourse.
Yeah.
Like it's gotten so specific. And so starting to work on expanding out the map of what is erotic can also start to both take the pressure off of sex, because you can start to have sex in different ways.
Right. Like that sex isn't just intercourse.
Right. It's all of these other things. And you also start to find what we call sexually relevant material or sexually relevant stimulation in all different parts of the world and of your experience.
Can you give some examples?
Like, obvious examples of sexually relevant material are like seeing someone that you find attractive, and then you'll feel a response in your body and in your genitals, most likely, like, ooh, there's a little bit of sensation building. That is sexually, like that person's body is sexually relevant to me. And as you start to expand out what is erotic, you can actually, this might sound weird and woo-woo, but you can start to feel like literal turn on. So sexual response in your body to a thunderstorm.
Yes. I was thinking that, like the wind, that's like,
right. Or the wind, or where there's,
or the smell of a flower, or
the participation of your body and of your erotic experience in this whole, larger than human world that we live in.
I love that, right? Where like turn on or being turned on or being aroused or whatever. I mean, it's so much bigger than we've been enculturated to experience it. And I think women, I don't know, sometimes women get a little bit more access to this, or our bodies just I don't know if our bodies seem to respond, or we're taught that it's okay for us to be a little bit more expressive, and so we can feel some of the things because we're allowed to express them. But it's been really amazing over the years also to watch and support men to become more and more sensitive, such that they can feel the world around them, right, as turn on or as arousal. That doesn't just have to be our genitals.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And some fun ways that you can start to bridge this. So bringing, like, expanding out what's erotic can be to actually, you have to be a little careful with this one so that you're in a private place and don't get arrested or something. But going out and self-pleasuring in the wild, in nature, where you're...
I like the warning, right? Don't get arrested.
Don't get arrested, but go do this. Seriously, go find a private place off trail and self-pleasure in the wild, or in your backyard.
Yeah.
Depending on your backyard, where you're just on the ground and you're with the world, rather than narrowing things down so much to your genitals and what you do in bed and what you do with a partner.
Well, I would imagine that for some men listening, that would be really bizarre. And for others, it would be really thrilling. And for others, it would be like, okay, that's something I could do, right? So we're all going to come to this with different backgrounds and histories and parental guidance and, all of that. And again, even just to notice, like, oh, well, what is my response to this idea of self-pleasuring out in nature, right? I mean, even starting to notice that brings awareness to, how am I thinking about this, and where might I be limiting myself?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's so, again, we have it all so collapsed into such a narrow box, and even talking within that box is uncomfortable for most of us.
Right.
But then if you start talking about these more unconventional ways of relating with sexuality and with the world, it can be really uncomfortable or really fucking liberating. Like,
I'm curious if you have an answer to this question of like, okay, if we're often even uncomfortable talking inside the box, what are some of the things that are outside the box that we may not even be aware of?
Oh, that's, again, coming back to the goallessness option. So that's one piece for sure.
I think that's a really beautiful way to get outside the box.
That's like the lid bursting off.
Yeah.
Right. Starting to simply include more of your body when you self-pleasure or when you're with a partner. We can get so zeroed in on our genitals, but expanding out to include everything.
Yeah.
When you're touching yourself or being touched can be a really simple way to do that, to get outside of the box. And other ways.
Would you include like different fetishes or BDSM or kink or certain like ways that people get turned on? Are those more outside of the box, inside the box?
Well, it sort of depends. That feels like actually a complicated answer and conversation, where in my world, certainly they're outside of the narrow box of conventional sexuality. Man and woman having intercourse. So certainly they're outside of that, but in some ways they can be further entrenching those expectations on us rather than opening us up to something new. And they can be opening us up to something new. So it depends, is the short answer.
And both can happen simultaneously.
Sure. Yeah. So the context really matters. The individual person's history and experiences really matters. How things are being done, who they're with, all of that matters so much in anything, but especially in the more unconventional experiences around sex and sexuality.
One of the things that we just briefly discussed before we started recording was the way that some people can get into a kind of, I don't know if it's a rut, but like this, there's only one way that orgasm can happen, right? Or there's one way that they can be touched, leads to orgasm. Other things might be pleasurable, but there's like a limitation or kind of a rigidity in that.
Totally.
Had some
totally.
ideas.
Yeah, so this is common across the board, men and women. So many people that I work with, it's like there's only one way I can get aroused, or there's only one way that I can get to orgasm. Um, whether it's a particular kind of touch, a specific fantasy, using porn, using a vibrator, anything. We can really get stuck in a rut, and it can actually be, I mean, obviously not a literal rut, but a rut in your neurology, in your neural pathways, where you've done or you started to do this thing in one particular way and it worked really well. So you kept doing it, and then you kept doing it, and you kept doing it. And then that pathway becomes so grooved that doing anything else is just frustrating. And so you keep coming back to that particular way of doing things. And a super simple way, and I'll send this to you. I have a recording of it, of the practice and an explanation of it, but you simply alternate, or pendulate is another word for it, back and forth between the habit that you have and something new. So that could be as simple as alternating, and this would be, you could do this on your own in self-pleasure or with a partner, and you can do it. The guided audio that I have, I think, has you alternating every 2 minutes or minute and a half or something like that. You can also just set an interval timer where a timer is going off every couple of minutes and you're switching, but you switch back and forth between something like using your right hand and then using your left hand. Or between being on your stomach and then being on your back, or watching porn and then pushing pause and not watching porn. And so you just go back and forth between the thing that works really well for you and then something new. And you start to weave new possibilities for yourself. It's sort of like it's really good for your brain. It's like brushing your teeth with your left hand instead of your right hand. Your brain starts to go nuts and form all these new connections and possibilities simply by doing that, because you're doing something that's outside of the normal realm, and your brain's like, whoa, we don't know what to do here. It's hard and frustrating, but we're building new pathways, and the more you do it, the easier it becomes, right? So it's doing the same thing, but with your sexual pleasure and your sexual response, because all of it is, thank God this is true, our sexual response, what happens in our bodies is built into our bodies, but what we respond to is a learned thing.
Oh, interesting.
And the kind of touch that we respond to is also a learned thing. And our brains and our nervous systems can grow and change until we die.
Okay. Mostly. So it's not set.
So it's not set in stone. We think that it is, because it's fucking hard to change this stuff, right? Yeah. Like, it's not easy. And we don't talk about sex. We don't talk about the specifics of how we find pleasure very often, even with our partners. Even with our partners, certainly not with community or friends. And that can be a really simple, it's uncomfortable and maybe strange at first, but a really simple thing you can do to start to learn more is just ask a friend, like, how do you self-pleasure? Like, how do you touch yourself? Because you can hear things that you never even imagined would happen, because our experience tends to be so narrow.
Right. And I could see even that might be, I don't know if that would be scarier for some men than, okay, well, how do you like to have sex with your partner? Or, how do you turn your woman on? Or, if you're in a heterosexual relationship, or, things like that. Again, start to notice, okay, what about this? If something's making me uncomfortable, or if I'm like, whoa, I could never do that, to notice, well, how come? And what would it mean about you? Or,
you can even start with something that's maybe more comfortable, which is talking to your partner about past experiences. So you could maybe ask, like, what have you done to other men or with other men that has worked for them?
Right. And I'm going to add, or what have we done that you've really liked, or what have we? Because for some men, I know it's like, I don't really want to hear about what's happened with others. But for others, it's great. Sure. Tell me all about it.
Sure. It can be, you can just mine a ton of information and possibilities from there. And it can be really uncomfortable.
Yes.
So yeah. I'm trying to think if there's anything more I want to say about the pendulation practice. it takes time, I guess, is the piece, because these pathways that we have get so grooved and settled in. And so starting with small adjustments and small changes is really the way to go, so that you can actually feel some success.
Mm.
You
And
know,
by small, how would someone do that?
like instead, like if there's one particular stroke that works really well for you, it might be doing just a slight variation where maybe instead of going at the pressure you would normally go, you either add a little bit more or a little bit less, or changing the speed just a little bit. So it's like a super small adjustment, so that you're not just sitting in the realm of frustration. Or if porn is something that you really rely on for arousal and orgasm, you can, instead of pushing pause, which I mentioned before, you can be watching it and then pushing pause. You might be watching it while self-pleasuring, and then just close your eyes for a couple of minutes of self-pleasure, and then open your eyes and then close your eyes. So you're not getting super black and white or trying to jump from point A to point X, you're taking baby steps along the way.
That's great, right? The simple experiments and small steps.
Totally.
Awesome. Well, okay, as usual, time has gone by really fast. I'm wondering, as we're wrapping up this episode, if there's anything you feel called to leave men with this time?
I think keeping in mind that how your body is responding isn't random. And that it is responding to something. And whether that's leading to, we talked a lot about sexual challenges at the beginning, but seeing if you can find a way to trust the intelligence of that response, and go deeper with it and figure out what's happening for you on a deeper level, assuming you've ruled out any sort of biological problems that are going on. But just really getting in there and being like, with your cock, like, what's up, buddy? Like, what's going on here? What do we need? What's not feeling okay? And actually spending time to build a relationship with this part of your body that we tend to try and lord over and have such intense expectations of.
Right. Without any of that, getting to know, or any space for like, oh, something might be going on here. You might need something else, right? It's more just like, you're supposed to do what you're supposed to do. And there's this kind of like a demanding father or something, right?
Totally. Versus being in relationship with. And I also like to think of our genitals, this is true for all of us, I think, as this is going to sound ridiculous, but apparently that's just what's happening today.
Okay.
As wild animals. Right? And so if you see a deer in the woods and you run right up to it, it's going to run the fuck away. But if you start to cultivate and build a relationship with it, and sort of slow down and come into contact through, I don't know how you relate with a deer, but
even slowing down, you can
start to invite it out and into relationship rather than just scaring it away.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, I'm just thinking of so many experiences where I have checked in with my body, and it takes a while too. Like, it takes a while and it's a strange thing, especially if you've never done this before, but to really get quiet enough to listen and allow your body to respond. But, I'm remembering a time, I don't know, it must be more than a decade ago in my marriage, where I suddenly had this experience of not being attracted to my partner. And it was like, we went to dinner with a couple and came home, and suddenly I just was like repulsed in this way. And then I was completely embarrassed about it. And I didn't want to say anything. And like, well, that's going to hurt his feelings. And, eventually the next morning he was like, what is going on? Because, it was clear something was going on. I was like, this is what happened. And as soon as I actually said it kind of resolved itself. I mean, sometimes it takes a little more than that, right? Sometimes it takes some exploration, or sometimes if something's been going on for years, but I'm a big fan of that, finding ways to be vulnerable And even if it's like a little step more vulnerable than, what you would have been, not like you have to go all the way to the bottom of the well. Yeah. And I just love what you're saying about, creating a relationship and checking in with your body and not trying to lord over and think that, the same idea about men, like with your genitals, like you've got to be hard and strong and powerful and never fail and, never have anything else going on other than success, and putting that story down.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing that I hear a little bit in your story is that those of us in the world of growth and learning and wanting to, grow our capacity and change who we are, not from a place of like, oh my God, I'm fucked up, from a place of, whoa, what else is possible? Mm-hmm. We sometimes still think that our attraction and our sexuality and all of that is a static thing.
Yep.
But it's actually as dynamic and mutable as anything else. It's not one way.
Yeah.
And so just opening the door to the conversation can start to create space where it's like, wow, I'm feeling repulsed by you right now. What's actually going on for me here? Am I no longer attracted to you? Is that never going to happen again? Or is something else going on? And can we get at the deeper layers of what's going on and then find, oh yeah, there's that attraction again. Maybe.
Right.
So,
right. And more trust for each other to be able to navigate those moments of not being turned on or not being connected or things like that.
Because they're going to happen in a long-term relationship. You're going to be repulsed by your partner at some point or other. So, yeah.
Oh, I love that. We could keep going again, with the freedom to, right. That a lot of people don't even talk about that they can be repulsed by their partners. So. Well, thank you so much again for joining me. And let's remind everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, my website is thiseroticlife.org. So that's a good place to go. And you can find me on Facebook too. I do Facebook Lives pretty much every Wednesday with all kinds of stuff like this. There's a wide variety because I'm working with men, women, couples, and all the layers of our sexuality. So that can be a fun way to stay in touch. Yeah.
Great. I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope it gives you a sense of what's possible and how good your life can be. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe to Man Alive and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to ShaynaJamesCoaching.com/manalive to get outtakes, videos, and raw footage I only share there. These are some of the most interesting parts of these expert conversations. You can also grab your copy of The Unknown Power to accelerate your career and solidify your confidence with women, because the two are related, and I know you don't have to settle for one or the other. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.